When you finally stop chasing the avoidant, when you cease the pursuit that has characterized the relationship, when you withdraw the attention and investment they've grown accustomed to receiving, regardless of how they behave, something significant shifts in the avoidant's internal landscape. This shift isn't immediate, and it isn't simple. The avoidance response to your withdrawal unfolds in stages, moving through relief to confusion to panic as they process what your absence actually means and what they've potentially lost. Understanding what happens in the avoidance mind when you stop chasing reveals why this withdrawal of pursuit is often more effective than any amount of communication about your needs, why the avoidant can ignore your expressed hurt but can't ignore your absence, why the dynamic that kept you trapped in cycles of pursuit and withdrawal only breaks when you stop participating in your assigned role. The avoidant's entire attachment strategy is built around maintaining distance while keeping you engaged, around controlling intimacy through withdrawal while ensuring you remain available through your pursuit. When you stop chasing, you disrupt this entire system. The avoidant loses the reassurance your pursuit provided, that they matter, that they're wanted, that they can create distance without real consequence. They lose the control they maintained through being the one who determined closeness and distance. They face the possibility of actual loss rather than managed distance, and they confront their own attachment patterns in ways they could avoid while you were pursuing, because your pursuit allowed them to focus on managing your behavior rather than examining their own. What happens in the avoidance mind when you stop chasing is a journey from comfortable distance to uncomfortable reckoning, a process that reveals whether they're capable of growth or whether they'll simply seek another person willing to pursue them. The initial relief that quickly turns to confusion. When you first stop chasing the avoidant, their immediate response is relief. The pressure they've been feeling, the pressure of your needs, your expectations, your pursuit during their withdrawals, lifts. They can breathe again without the weight of someone else's desire for connection, without the guilt of knowing their behavior hurts you, without the anxiety of managing someone else's emotional state. This relief confirms the avoidant's core belief that distance equals peace, that separation brings comfort, that their instinct to withdraw is correct. They interpret your stop pursuit as you finally understanding their need for space, finally respecting their boundaries, finally backing off in ways they've wanted but couldn't directly ask for without seeming like they don't care about the relationship. The relief manifests as the avoidant enjoying their newfound freedom without the complication of your pursuit. They can focus on work, hobbies, friendships, other connections without feeling pulled back toward you. They can go days without contact, without the anxiety of knowing you're hurt by their silence. They can make plans without considering you, can structure their time without accommodation of relationship demands. This freedom feels validating. They've been saying they need space, and now they have it, and it feels good initially. The avoidant might even feel grateful that you've finally gotten it, that you're no longer being needy or demanding, that you're respecting their independence in ways they've wanted all along. But the relief is complicated by a subtle undercurrent of confusion that emerges fairly quickly. The avoidant expected your pursuit to pause temporarily, expected you to give them space, and then return with renewed attention once they felt comfortable re-engaging. But your pursuit hasn't paused. It's stopped. You're not checking in. You're not reaching out. You're not showing the signs of waiting hopefully for them to come back. This absence of expected pursuit creates cognitive dissonance. The avoidant thought you'd always be there pursuing, thought their withdrawal was safe because your pursuit was constant. Your actual absence, rather than temporary retreat, doesn't fit their expectations and creates the first seeds of confusion about what's happening. The confusion intensifies as the avoidant notices that you're not reacting to their withdrawal in familiar ways, Usually, when they create distance, you respond with increased contact, more messages, more attempts to connect, more emotional expression about missing them. Your predictable response to their withdrawal has always been part of the pattern, part of what made their withdrawal feel safe and controllable. But now, you're not responding predictably, you're not pursuing, you're not even seeming bothered by their distance. This unpredictability is unsettling because the avoidant has lost their ability to predict your behavior, has lost the reassurance that their usual strategies will produce usual results. The initial relief also begins to feel hollow as the avoidant realizes that relief isn't the only thing they're feeling. There's something else emerging, a vague sense that something is off, that the dynamic has shifted in ways beyond just you, giving them the space they wanted. The avoidant might not be able to name this feeling initially, might dismiss it as nothing, might tell themselves they're just adjusting to having the space they've always claimed to need. But the feeling persists, growing from vague unease into something more specific. The sense that you're not just giving them space, but that you've genuinely disengaged, that you've stopped caring in ways that go beyond temporary frustration or hurt. The confusion includes the avoidant wondering why you stopped chasing now. What changed? Did something happen? Are you okay? Are you angry? Have you moved on? The avoidant realizes they don't know what's happening with you because you're not communicating your inner experience through pursuit anymore. Your pursuit used to keep them informed. When you pursued, they knew you were still invested, still hurt, still hoping. Your absence leaves them uncertain about your emotional state and your intentions, and this uncertainty is uncomfortable. The avoidant is used to having information about where you stand based on your behavior toward them, but your withdrawal has made you opaque in ways that create confusion about what comes next. The relief turning to confusion also involves the avoidant starting to notice your absence in their daily life. Initially, the freedom felt good. No expectations to manage, no guilt to carry, no one to consider. But as days pass without your contact, without your presence, without the small ways you used to show up in their awareness, they notice the gap. Not painfully at first, but noticeably. Something that was there isn't there anymore, and the absence itself becomes a presence. Not the positive presence of connection, but the negative presence of something missing that used to be there. The avoidant might check their phone and notice no messages from you. They might experience something they want to share and realize you're not the person they're sharing it with anymore. They might move through their day and notice at various points that you're just not there in the ways you used to be. The confusion that follows relief is the avoidant's first indication that your stopped pursuit isn't just a temporary boundary or a brief withdrawal of attention. It's something more significant, something that shifts the entire dynamic, something that removes the foundation the relationship was built on, your consistent pursuit regardless of their withdrawal. The avoidant is confused because they're discovering that they relied on your pursuit more than they realized, that your constant availability and attention provided something they didn't consciously value, but are noticing the absence of, that the dynamic they controlled through withdrawal only worked because you participated through pursuit. The confusion is the beginning of the avoidant recognizing that something fundamental has changed, and that change isn't within their control in ways they're accustomed to. The unsettling recognition that you've actually moved on. As the avoidant's initial relief fades and confusion intensifies, they begin to recognize something more unsettling. You haven't just paused pursuit temporarily to give them space, you've actually moved on. This recognition doesn't come all at once. It builds through accumulated evidence that you're not waiting, not hoping, not organizing your life around their eventual return. The avoidant sees or senses that you're building a life that doesn't include space for them, that you're investing energy in other people and pursuits that you've genuinely released the relationship rather than simply giving them temporary distance. This recognition is profoundly unsettling because it means the avoidant has lost something they took for granted: your guaranteed availability, regardless of how they behaved. The recognition begins when the avoidant notices you're not monitoring their activity in ways you used to. You're not watching their social media, not asking mutual friends about them, not keeping track of their life from a distance. The avoidant might post something expecting your reaction and getting none. They might hear through mutual connections that you haven't been asking about them. They might notice that you seem to be going about your life without awareness of or concern for what they're doing. This lack of attention from you is jarring because the avoidant has grown accustomed to being monitored, to having their activity noticed and tracked, to knowing that even when they're distant, you're still paying attention. Your genuine inattention signals that you're not just giving space, you're genuinely disengaged. The unsettling recognition deepens when the avoidant becomes aware that you're actively building a life without them. They might hear that you're dating someone new, that you've taken up new activities, that you're spending time with friends you neglected during the relationship, that you've made life changes that suggest forward movement rather than suspended waiting. This evidence of your active life without them is disturbing because it contradicts the avoidant's assumption that you'd remain in a holding pattern, that you'd be there when they decided to re-engage, that your life revolved enough around them that their absence would create a void rather than an opportunity you'd fill with other connections and pursuits. The recognition that you've moved on also includes the avoidant sensing a shift in your energy when you do interact. If you respond to their messages at all, your responses are cordial but not emotionally invested. You're not cold exactly, but you're not warm in the ways you used to be. You're not asking questions about their life, not expressing interest in their activities, not trying to extend conversations or create connection. The energy you once directed toward them, the attention, the care, the investment, has been redirected elsewhere, and the avoidant can feel this absence of focused energy. It's unsettling because it means you're not just temporarily hurt or angry. You've actually disengaged emotionally in ways that suggest genuine moving on rather than tactical distance. The unsettling recognition includes the avoidant realizing that you're not waiting for them to be ready. During the relationship, the implicit dynamic was that the avoidant controlled the pace. They withdrew when closeness felt uncomfortable and returned when they wanted connection, and you were expected to wait during the withdrawal and be available during the return. But you're not waiting anymore. You're not in suspended animation during their withdrawal. You're living fully, making decisions without consideration of their timeline, building a life that assumes your continued independence rather than their eventual return. This recognition that you're not waiting is unsettling because it means the avoidant has lost control over the relationship's timeline, has lost the to return whenever they're ready and find you available. The recognition that you've moved on also involves the avoidant confronting evidence that you're happier without them. They might see you looking more vibrant in photos, hear from others that you seem lighter and more yourself, observe that you're thriving in ways you weren't during the relationship. This evidence that you're better off without them is particularly unsettling because it contradicts the avoidant's narrative about the relationship. They thought you needed them, thought you were more attached than they were, thought their presence enhanced your life, despite their patterns. Discovering that you're actually happier without the burden of their inconsistency forces the avoidant to confront that they might have been a negative presence rather than a positive one, that their patterns created damage that your life is recovering from in their absence. The unsettling recognition includes the avoidant realizing that you're not available for their return. in the ways they assumed you would be. When they finally do reach out, whether with a breadcrumb to test your receptiveness or with genuine attempt at reconnection, they discover you're not immediately responsive, not eagerly welcoming their contact, not grateful they've decided to re-engage. You might not respond at all. You might respond briefly without enthusiasm. You might be unavailable because you genuinely have other plans and other priorities. This unavailability is profoundly unsettling because it means the avoidant can't simply return and resume the relationship when they're comfortable. The door they assumed would always be open isn't as accessible as they thought. The recognition that you've actually moved on forces the avoidant to confront that their withdrawal has created real consequences rather than managed distance. They thought they could create space while maintaining your attachment, could be unavailable while keeping you available, could withdraw knowing you'd pursue. But you stopped pursuing, actually moved on, built a life without them, and now they're facing the possibility that returning isn't an option, that they've lost something they can't simply reclaim by deciding they're ready for it. This recognition is the point where the avoidant's comfortable distance becomes uncomfortable loss, where their relief about space transforms into anxiety about permanent separation, where they move from managing the dynamic to losing control of it entirely. The activation of their own abandonment fears. Once the avoidant recognizes that you've actually moved on, rather than just giving temporary space, something profound shifts in their psychological experience. Their own abandonment fears, which they've spent their entire attachment strategy defending against, suddenly activate in ways they haven't experienced during the relationship. The avoidant's entire defensive structure, the withdrawal, the distance, the emotional unavailability, has been designed to protect them from being abandoned by ensuring they never need anyone enough that being left would devastate them. But when you stop chasing and genuinely move on, the avoidant faces the very abandonment they've been defending against, and this activation of their core fear creates an internal crisis that can fundamentally shift how they experience the relationship and their own patterns. The activation of abandonment fears manifests first as anxiety that feels foreign and overwhelming to the avoidant. Throughout the relationship, you were the anxious one, worrying about their availability, concerned about the relationship's status, anxious during their withdrawals. The avoidant maintained calm, distance, control over their emotional state. But now, the roles have reversed. The avoidant finds themselves anxious about whether you'll respond to their messages, worried about whether you've moved on permanently, concerned about whether they've lost something important. This anxiety is disorienting because it contradicts the avoidant's self-concept as someone who doesn't experience this kind of relationship anxiety, as someone whose independence protects them from these uncomfortable feelings. The abandonment fears also surface as the avoidant experiencing intrusive thoughts about you in ways they didn't when you were pursuing them. When you were chasing, the avoidant could take your presence for granted, could focus on other aspects of their life without you consuming their mental space. But now you occupy their thoughts in uncomfortable ways. They wonder what you're doing, who you're with, whether you're thinking about them at all. They imagine scenarios where you're with someone else, where you're happy without them, where you've completely forgotten them. These intrusive thoughts are the avoidance abandonment anxiety manifesting cognitively, creating mental preoccupation with your absence that they couldn't avoid or control. The activation of abandonment fears includes the avoidant experiencing physical symptoms of anxiety they typically don't associate with relationships. They might have trouble sleeping, might feel a knot in their stomach when thinking about you, might experience restlessness or inability to focus on other things. These somatic experiences of anxiety are the avoidance nervous system responding to perceived abandonment, to the threat of permanent loss. to the recognition that someone important is slipping away. The physical nature of this anxiety makes it harder for the avoidant to intellectualize away or minimize, makes it harder to maintain the story that they're fine with distance, that they don't need anyone. The abandonment fears also manifest as the avoidant suddenly noticing all the ways you were present in their life that they took for granted. They realize you provided emotional support they didn't acknowledge needing. You offered understanding and patience with their patterns that they dismissed as you being too accommodating. You showed up in small ways, remembering things important to them, checking in during difficult times, celebrating their successes that they didn't fully value while they were happening. Now that these things are absent, the avoidant notices the gap, notices how much you actually provided that they convinced themselves they didn't need. This recognition of what you offered activates fear about losing something valuable they didn't protect or appreciate while they had access to it. The activation of abandonment fears includes the avoidant experiencing panic about being replaced, about you finding someone who can show up in ways they couldn't. The avoidant might learn or imagine that you're dating someone new, and this triggers intense anxiety about being replaced by someone better, someone more emotionally available, someone capable of the consistency the avoidant struggled to provide. This fear of replacement is particularly acute because it confirms the avoidant's deep insecurity that they're not enough, that their limitations make them ultimately unlovable, that anyone who truly knows them will eventually leave for someone without such significant wounds and defensive patterns. The abandonment fears also surface as the avoidant confronting their own pattern of pushing away people who love them. They might have a moment of clarity where they recognize that this isn't the first relationship where their patterns created distance that eventually became permanent loss. They see the thread of their own behavior destroying connections across their relational history. This pattern recognition activates abandonment fears because it suggests the problem isn't that people leave them, it's that they push people away and then experience the leaving as abandonment. The avoidant confronts that they're creating the very outcome they most fear through the defensive strategies meant to prevent it. The activation of abandonment fears can also trigger the avoidant's memories of early experiences where they learned that depending on people leads to disappointment. The current experience of you withdrawing might connect to childhood experiences of caregivers being unavailable, of emotional needs not being met, of learning that expressing need leads to rejection or neglect. This activation of early attachment wounds makes the current abandonment feel more significant and more painful than it might otherwise. Because it's not just about losing you, it's about the confirmation of core beliefs formed in childhood that people leave, that depending on others isn't safe, that attachment leads to pain. The avoidance abandonment fears being activated is profoundly ironic because their entire attachment strategy has been designed to prevent this exact experience. They've maintained distance to avoid needing anyone enough that losing them would hurt. They've kept options open to ensure no single person was essential. They've protected themselves from vulnerability to avoid the pain of rejection. But all of these protective strategies have created the abandonment they feared, not because you chose to leave, but because their patterns pushed you away until you had no choice but to leave for your own well-being. The activation of their abandonment fears forces the avoidant to confront that their defenses failed, that protection created isolation, that avoiding vulnerability prevented the connection that would have made them feel secure rather than abandoned. This recognition that they've created their own abandonment through the strategies meant to prevent it is devastating and potentially transformative if the avoidant has enough awareness and courage to sit with this truth rather than defending against it through finding someone new to repeat the same patterns with. The internal conflict between pride and panic. Once the avoidance abandonment fears are activated by your stopped pursuit, they enter a period of intense internal conflict between their pride and their panic, between their defensive need to maintain the appearance of not needing anyone and their genuine distress about losing you. This conflict creates a psychological battle where different parts of the avoidant are pulling in opposite directions. One part insisting they're fine alone, that they don't need to chase anyone, that reaching out would be weakness, while another part recognizes they're losing something important and feels increasingly desperate to reconnect. Understanding this internal conflict reveals why avoidants often act inconsistently during this period, why they might reach out and then withdraw again, why they struggle to make clear decisions about whether to pursue you or let you go. The conflict manifests first in the avoidant's struggle with whether to reach out at all. Their pride tells them that reaching out after you've stopped chasing would be admitting they need you, would be reversing the power dynamic where they were the pursued one, would be showing vulnerability they've spent their life avoiding. Their pride insists that if you wanted them, you'd be pursuing them, that your stopped pursuit means you don't care enough, that reaching out would be pathetic and desperate. But their panic tells them that if they don't reach out, they'll lose you permanently. That pride is a poor consolation for genuine loss, that the vulnerability of reaching out is preferable to the pain of never having you back in their life. The internal conflict also involves the avoidant wrestling with their self-concept as someone who doesn't need people versus the reality that they're experiencing genuine distress about losing you. The avoidant has built their identity around independence, around not being the needy one, around being the person who's comfortable alone. Admitting they need you, that they're hurt by your absence, that they want you back. All of this contradicts their self-concept and threatens their identity. But the panic they're feeling, the anxiety about losing you, the recognition that they actually need what you provided, this reality is undermining their defensive self-concept, forcing them to confront that they're not as independent and invulnerable as they've believed. The conflict between pride and panic also manifests in the avoidance calculations about whether reaching out would even work. Their pride wants assurance that if they reach out, you'll be receptive, that they won't face rejection, that their vulnerability will be rewarded rather than met with your disinterest or coldness. But they have no such assurance. You've stopped pursuing. You've moved on. You might not welcome their contact. This uncertainty makes their pride argue strongly against reaching out because the risk of rejection is high, and rejection would be humiliating evidence that they needed you more than you needed them, that they misjudged the dynamic, that they lost something they can't reclaim just by deciding they want it back. The internal conflict includes the avoidant experiencing competing narratives about the relationship and its ending. Their pride constructs a narrative where you were too demanding, where your needs were excessive, where the relationship was too much work, where they're better off without the complications you brought to their life. This narrative protects their ego and justifies their patterns, but their panic creates a competing narrative where you were patient and understanding, where your needs were normal and reasonable, where they sabotaged something good through their own fears and limitations, where they're not better off, but rather lonelier and emptier without you. These competing narratives battle for dominance in the avoidant's mind, making it difficult for them to have clear perspective on the relationship or clear decision-making about how to proceed. The conflict also involves the avoidance calculations about timing, whether they've waited too long, whether reaching out now would be too late, whether you've already moved on so completely that their pursuit would be pointless. Their pride says they should maintain distance longer, should wait until you reach out first, should never be the one who breaks the silence. But their panic says that every day they wait is a day you're moving further away. That hesitation could mean permanent loss. That pride is costing them something valuable. This timing conflict can paralyze the avoidant, leaving them unable to reach out, but also unable to move on, stuck in an uncomfortable limbo, where they're neither pursuing you nor accepting the relationship's end. The internal conflict between pride and panic also includes the avoidant struggling with what they would say if they did reach out. Their pride wants them to reach out casually, without revealing how much they've been affected by your absence, without admitting need or vulnerability, a casual message that tests your receptiveness, without exposing themselves to rejection. But their panic wants them to be honest, to express what they're actually feeling, to admit they miss you and want you back, to be vulnerable in ways they've never been before, because half measures might not be sufficient to reclaim what they've lost. The avoidant vacillates between these approaches, unsure which would be more effective and terrified that either might result in rejection. The conflict also manifests in the avoidant's struggle with whether they've actually changed enough to justify reaching out. Their pride says they're fine as they are, that if you can't accept them with their limitations, then the relationship wasn't right anyway, that they shouldn't have to change themselves for anyone. But their panic recognizes that their patterns created real problems, that they hurt you in ways they need to acknowledge and address, that reaching out without having done any work on their attachment wounds would likely result in recreating the same dynamics that pushed you away. This recognition that change is necessary conflicts with their pride about not needing to change, creating paralysis where they know they should do therapy or personal work. But their pride resists admitting they need that kind of help. The internal conflict between pride and panic ultimately keeps many avoidants stuck, unable to pursue you effectively because their pride sabotages their panic's attempts to reconnect, unable to move on because their panic about losing you prevents them from accepting the relationship's end. This stuck state is uncomfortable for the avoidant, but it's also familiar. It's another form of distance, another way of avoiding the vulnerability of genuine pursuit or the grief of genuine loss. Some avoidants remain in this conflicted state indefinitely, never reaching out but never moving on, maintaining psychological distance from both the vulnerability of reconnection and the pain of permanent loss. Others eventually have their panic overcome their pride, reaching out in ways that reveal genuine vulnerability and need, and others have their pride win, deciding that maintaining their self-concept as someone who doesn't need anyone is more important than the relationship, accepting the loss as preferable to the humiliation of pursuing someone who stopped pursuing them.